Today we're taking to the air once more and talking about a G.I. Joe who's named after an ancient technological mill that converts airflow to angular kinetic energy, the very thing that Don Quixote attacked in Miguel Cervantes' famous story. You guessed it, today we're talking about none other than WINDMILL and the somewhat quixotic Skystorm. Ed Roth was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was named after a Hasbro market researcher. In G.I. Joe lore, Edward Roth became a flight instructor at the U.S. Army Flight Warrant Officer School at Fort Rucker, Fort Novosel, in Alabama, and there he began flying experimental helicopter prototypes for the Army's Aviation Department test activity at the U.S. Army Aviation Technical Test Center. ATTC moved to Redstone Arsenal with 2005's base realignment and closure process, though. Mother Rucker is home to the U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence, along with the Air Force's 23rd Flying Training Squadron for Air Force rotary wing pilots in the 1st Aviation Brigade. This is the same brigade that Murdoch from A-Team was in. Roth was there piloting prototypes, demonstrators, and experimental rotary wing craft, which earned him his codename WINDMILL. Working names for WINDMILL did include things like Exterminator, Cyclone, Chill, and Cool Breeze before ultimately landing on WINDMILL. This work would put him on course to pilot a new craft for an elite group of special operators known as G.I. Joe. In the 1970s, a professor by the name of Ian Cheeseman conceptualized an airframe that could start and stop in flight, and which utilized the Coanda principle to accomplish that very thing. The Coanda principle essentially is the phenomenon where airflow will follow a flat or curved surface until those angles become too extreme and it's forced to separate. It also creates an area of lower pressure. It allowed for Cheeseman's design to use airflow, much in the same way that traditional craft use flaps. This effect is named after Henry Coanda, who built the Coanda in 1910 in the early part of the 20th century. The U.S. Navy's David W. Taylor Naval Ship Research and Development Center took Cheeseman's research and began working on their own project, developing a concept which uses rotary blades to lift for start-stop and then engines and airflow for lateral movement. In 1976, DARPA jumped in on the development of X-Wings. NASA and the U.S. Army worked on their own program, along with aircraft manufacturer Sikorsky, to develop their own experimental craft called the RSRA, or Rotor Systems Research Aircraft. In the 1960s, the U.S. Army sought to replace the OH-13 Sioux and the OH-23 Raven. Sikorsky developed the S-61F experimental compound airframe that helped kickstart this research. The Sikorsky S-66 AAF-SS used a rear prop that could swivel between tail rotor and propeller configurations. Sikorsky also developed the XH-51A compound aircraft, whose research would later be incorporated into Lockheed's AH-56 Cheyenne, the helicopter that beat the S-66. By 1969, the U.S. Army realized that the Cheyenne had tons of technical problems and put out a request for replacements. So, Sikorsky submitted their S-67 Blackhawk along with competitor Bell's King Cobra. While they lost out to what would ultimately become the AH-64 Apache, Sikorsky did get to use the Blackhawk name later on. This was a perfect time for Sikorsky to move their RSRA R&D to this new project. They heavily modified the S-67 Blackhawk by combining it with parts from the S-61 Sea King and applied the RSRA research to their new test platform, adding the rotor wing idea to this craft, and thus was born Sikorsky's S-72 RSRA, the X-Wing chopper. They also put GE TF-34 turbofan engines on one of these platforms, the same engines used on the Fairchild A-10 Thunderbolt. By 1982, Sikorsky won a contract and began construction and airflow testing using NASA's Ames wind tunnel along with flight testing at NASA's Dryden Flight Test Research Facility out at Edwards Air Force Base. Tests were conducted on the S-72 RSRA, which would be dubbed the Sikorsky X-Wing due to the fact that the main rotor stopped in an X shape in flight. The X-Wing's project engineer manager, Arthur Linden, was quoted as saying, "Here you have something that could fly not by the earth at some 30 to 40 knots when that was appropriate, go out and do helicopter dogfights, and then also fly at 450 to 500 knots and do dogfights with fixed-wing planes." Another use would have been for U.S. Navy fleet protection, being able to fly combat air patrols around a carrier strike group and then stop and hover to dip sonar. I suppose it was bad timing, but the craft was featured in December 1987's issue of Popular Mechanics magazine, which showed concepts of America's future air strike force. This included the bone replacement in the form of the advanced technology bomber that became the B-2 Spirit, along with the tilt-rotor V-22 Osprey, the X-Wing helicopter, and the next-gen light scout attack helicopter, the LHX chopper that became the RAH-66 Comanche. The issue also featured the ATF, the Advanced Tactical Fighter F-15 Eagle replacement, which resulted in the YF-22 Lightning, renamed later to Raptor, and the YF-23 Black Widow. Incidentally, Eagles are still aloft in the form of the F-15EX Eagle II. The Lightning name went to the Lightning II, the F-35s that came out of the Joint Strike Fighter program. According to the article, in about 30 seconds when the rotor stopped and is now a fixed wing, pressurized airflow is blown through slots in the main rotor blades, which produce both control and lift. The first flight happened at the beginning of December '87, but after 3 more flights, government funding for the project ended and the program was scrapped and the 2 existing models were grounded. One, the weathered and beaten up with time and the elements, does remain in the grass at Fort Rucker, and the other is stored at the Dryden Flight Research Center. Sikorsky's research into rotor work continues in the form of the tilt rotor replacement for the Blackhawk. They lost to Bell's V-280 Valor, but Sikorsky is currently challenging the future long-range assault aircraft findings. In G.I. Joe lore, though, the X-Wing concept was not completely scrapped, but instead was transferred over to the recently formed U.S. Special Operations Command and assigned to the G.I. Joe team for future testing and combat operations. And due to his history with helicopter testing, Roth, codenamed Windmill, was reassigned to the G.I. Joe team as the pilot of the X-Wing, now redesignated Skystorm. Windmill made his debut in June 1988's G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero comic book series with issue 72. In this issue, he was riding shotgun in Skidmark's Desert Fox, escorting Wildcard and his mean dog back to the pit. En route, they ran into a Stratoviper that Dr. Mindbender had turned into a Stellar Stiletto pilot named Star Viper. Stratoviper's pilot Cobra's Night Raven S3Ps, while the Star Viper pilots the Cobra Stiletto. Interestingly, the Night Raven's design looks a lot like the concept art by Attila Hedja shown in the same Popular Mechanics issue from December '87, which also combined elements of the M21 variant of the SR-71 Blackbird that came with the D-21 drone. While the Stellar Stiletto seems to have been borrowed from concepts of the USSR's Project R, a project to develop man-maneuverable vehicles designed to destroy satellites for the Soviet space program, and which turned it into a single stage-to-orbit spaceplane. Interestingly, Fun School Batman got his own Stellar Stiletto, which was repainted as the Batman Feature Battlejet. So anyway, back on topic, unbeknownst to Windmill and Skidmark, Star Viper hung on underneath their Desert Fox to sneak right into the Joe's base. Gung-Ho and Dusty met at the main gate to review their transfer orders and then let them through. They then went into a Quonset hut and met with Spirit and asked him to let them process in. So Spirit opened the hatch and brought them deep underground, where they got a tour of the main staging level and other areas like the living quarters and supply, which was a big distraction while Star Viper managed to sneak inside as well. This was just at the same time that some other Joes were updating the black box in the USS Defiant shuttle, another craft based in the real world, and that was on the X-33 Venture Star. This is exactly what Star Viper was after, and which also led to the G.I. Joe team deciding to assault Cobra Island during the Cobra Civil War that pitted Cobra Commander's faction against Serpentor's loyalists. Windmill and the team pursued the Star Viper, but he escaped in a Stellar Stiletto. Windmill then appeared with his Skystorm in issue 119 for the first time. As a quick aside, a former Marvel employee once told me a funny story about when he was working on this issue, cutting and dry mounting word bubbles to art pages. On the opening splash page, Herb Trimpe drew a BE-12 Cheka, NATO codename Male, that was flying over a pier to pick up Cobra Commander, who was standing in a spotlight on the pier. If you look closely, Cobra Commander is giving the plane the middle finger. This art somehow made it past editor Bobby Chase, and then jokingly known as the secret Cobra salute among Marvel bullpenners. So anyway, it was Windmill in his plane vectored to that AO by Hawk that was following the BE-12 in full stealth mode. Windmill tracked the plane to a small atoll off the coast of Brazil called Atoll das Rocas, where Cobra had set up a satellite tracking station along with storage for their next generation of battle android troopers. Hawk put together a strike package which included Windmill as backup. Windmill did not appear in issue 199, however, Lift Ticket and Slipstream were in the Sierra Gordo jungle on the Bob Graves rescue mission, and there Lift Ticket called Slipstream Lift Ticket, and Slipstream called Lift Ticket Windmill. Whoops. In issue 214, during the ceremony at the pit to transfer Snake Eye's casket to Arlington, Windmill and the Skystorm were part of the flyover formation, where we see him saluting from the cockpit of the Skystorm as tears roll down his cheeks. And that was the last time we've seen Windmill in comic book form, but perhaps not the last time. When Marvel shot down ARAH with issue 155 in the 1990s, Devil's Due Publishing and Image Comics eventually picked up the publishing rights after Dark Horse tried their hand. So when this new continuity, his team was reinstated, Windmill flew his X-Wing during the invasion of Cobra Island during the time when Serpentor and its cult, called the Coil, had taken over. In the 2013 G.I. Joe series, Windmill's Skystorm was ambushed by a maggot tank. He was shot down and killed. The rest of the G.I. Joe team found him suspended from his parachute. The Skystorm appeared in animated form in Deke's Operation Dragonfire, but it was flown by Scoop, not Windmill. And it was also seen in the 1988 toy commercial for the X-Wing and the Mean Dog. Windmill was released as an action figure in 1988 as the driver for the Skystorm X-Wing chopper. It boasts rotor blades that extend and retract, a titanium alloy rotor head, and vertical lift radome that releases and locks the blades, along with winged X cross-section, air-to-ground anti-tank missiles, AIM-24 trimmed Sparrow air-to-air missiles, fly-by-wire computer-assisted cockpit controls, a heads-up display, a blast-proof canopy, flex armor-plated fuselage bottom, and imposer 9mm pivoting autoload twin cannons, which, according to box art, could be brought to bear on Cobra's intelligence posts permanently. Just in case he had to set her down in a hot zone, Windmill came with a black revolver, which looks somewhat like a Colt single-action army, like the .357 caliber from the Peacemaker series. But correct me if I'm wrong there in the comments. In 2017, the G.I. Joe Collectors Club figure subscription service had another version of Windmill, a search and rescue personnel recovery pilot that was based on the 2004 India Fun School release of Windmill, which meant this too came with a helicopter backpack. And I'll leave you with a quote from Windmill's file card, which says, "When the G.I. Joes are sitting on a hot LZ waiting for an extraction chopper, they want fast air support and maximum fire suppression. The X-Wing clocks in at 345 miles per hour in its stopped motor mode and can carry a bigger payload than a Dragonfly. Windmill can get there faster with more thrust, and once he's there, he can make every piece of ordnance count." And with that, that's a wrap on this one, my friends. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.